When the Galactic Empire first encountered Earth's military forces, they expected to find another species of rational, civilized commanders leading orderly battalions according to established galactic warfare protocols. What they discovered instead shattered their understanding of combat itself. The Empire had conquered 847 worlds using the same predictable pattern. Logical generals moving troops like chess pieces, following ancient rules of engagement that had governed galactic warfare for millennia. Every species fought the same way, calculated, methodical, honorable. But Earth didn't send generals. Earth didn't deploy tacticians or strategists or noble commanders who would negotiate terms and fight by the rules. Earth unleashed something the galaxy had never seen before. Savage warriors wearing the thin veneer of military uniforms. Creatures who fought not for honor or territory or even survival, but for the pure, terrifying joy of making their enemies suffer. The Empire thought they were facing soldiers. They were wrong. They were facing predators who had spent centuries perfecting the art of creative violence, who treated warfare not as a noble pursuit, but as the ultimate expression of their species' darkest instincts. And now, as Admiral Zexthal stared at the tactical display showing the complete annihilation of his advanced fleet by a force 1/10 its size, he finally understood the warning that had been buried in Earth's first transmission to the galaxy. We tried to warn you. We tried to tell you what we are. But you wouldn't listen. You thought our uniforms made us civilized. You were wrong. Admiral Zexthal of the Galactic Empire's Third Conquest Fleet had overseen the submission of 18 worlds in his career. Each conquest followed the same predictable pattern. Arrive with overwhelming force, demonstrate superior technology, offer terms to the local military commanders, and accept their inevitable surrender when faced with impossible odds. The entire process rarely took more than a few solar cycles. Standing on the bridge of his flagship, the massive dreadnought Eternal Dominion, Zexthal studied the tactical display showing Earth's solar system. Intelligence reports indicated a relatively young civilization, barely 3 centuries into their space age, with a modest collection of orbital platforms and a small defensive fleet. Standard conquest protocols suggested this would be one of the simpler operations of his career. Admiral, his tactical officer reported, "We're receiving a transmission from the human homeworld." Zexthal's 4 eyes focused on the communication station. In his experience, first contact transmissions were always the same. Either desperate pleas for mercy or formal diplomatic protocols requesting negotiations. Either response made the conquest process smoother. "Display it," he commanded. The holographic display activated, showing a human figure in what appeared to be a military uniform. The being was smaller than most sapient species, with only 2 eyes and a strangely predatory facial structure. When it spoke, its voice carried an undertone that made Zexthal's scales ripple with an emotion he couldn't identify. To the approaching fleet, the human began, "This is General Patricia Morrison of Earth's Unified Defense Command. We've been monitoring your approach for the past 47 hours. Before you proceed, we feel obligated to provide you with some context about our species that your intelligence gathering may have missed." Zexthal found this unusual. Most species either immediately surrendered or issued empty threats. This human seemed to be offering information voluntarily. The general continued, "Humans evolved as persistence predators on a death world. For 90% of our evolutionary history, we hunted our prey by following it until it collapsed from exhaustion, then killed it with primitive weapons while it was too tired to resist. We spent the remaining 10% of our development perfecting increasingly creative ways to kill each other." The bridge fell silent. Zexthal had never heard a species describe itself in such terms during first contact. In our recorded history alone, the human went on, we have fought over 14,000 wars, ranging from small tribal conflicts to planet-spanning devastation that consumed entire generations. We have developed 847 distinct methods of psychological warfare, 1,200 different torture techniques, and have weaponized everything from disease to weather to the fundamental forces of physics. Zexthal's tactical officer leaned closer. Admiral, this could be psychological warfare, attempting to make us fear them before battle. But something in the human general's expression suggested she wasn't trying to intimidate them. If anything, she seemed to be warning them. We tell you this, General Morrison said, because every species that has encountered humans in combat has made the same fatal error. They see our uniforms, our rank structures, our apparent military discipline, and they assume we fight like civilized beings. They expect commanders who follow rules of engagement, who value honor over victory, who treat warfare as a noble pursuit governed by ancient traditions. The general's expression grew colder. They're always disappointed. Earth doesn't produce noble warriors or honorable commanders. Earth produces killers who learn to wear uniforms. The clothes don't change what we are underneath. They never have. The transmission paused, and for a moment, Zexthal could see something in the human's eyes that made his blood run cold. It was the look of a predator sizing up prey, calculating the most efficient way to bring it down. We are giving you one opportunity to withdraw, Morrison concluded. Not because we fear you, but because once this begins, we won't be able to stop ourselves. It's what we are. It's what we've always been. The universe is about to remember why humans are apex predators. The transmission ended. Zexthal stood in the ensuing silence, processing what he had just heard. In his experience, species that made threats were usually the easiest to conquer. But something about this transmission felt different. The human hadn't been making threats. She had been issuing a warning. Analysis? He asked his staff. His intelligence officer consulted his datapad. Our xenological profiles indicate that humans are a relatively young species with no significant military victories against advanced civilizations. Their technology is primitive compared to our own, and their numbers are insufficient to pose a meaningful threat. His tactical officer nodded in agreement. Their largest ships are barely the size of our escort frigates. Total estimated military personnel appears to be less than 50 million across their entire planet. Against our fleet of 200 capital ships and 15 million troops, they have no chance of victory. Zexthal studied the tactical display again. The numbers supported his officer's assessment. Yet something about the human general's warning continued to disturb him. In his 18 previous conquests, no species had ever bothered to describe their evolutionary history during first contact. Most focused on immediate diplomatic or military concerns. What do we know about their evolutionary background? He asked. His intelligence officer consulted his files. They evolved on a Class 7 death world with extreme environmental conditions. High gravity, aggressive fauna, unstable climate patterns. Estimated extinction events during their evolution, 43. Species that survive alongside them in their ecosystem, less than 2% of historical biodiversity. That's unusual, Zexthal's science officer interjected. Most sapient species evolve on worlds where cooperation and intelligence provide survival advantages over aggression. A world that eliminates 98% of all species would typically produce either perfect prey animals or... The science officer trailed off, realizing the implications. Or perfect predators, Zexthal finished grimly. Before he could consider this further, Alarms began sounding across the bridge. His sensor officer looked up from his station with confusion written across his features. Admiral, we're detecting multiple launch signatures from the human homeworld and their orbital installations. Appears to be their entire defensive fleet, approximately 400 vessels of various sizes. Zexthal almost smiled. This was more familiar territory. Desperate species often launched hopeless attacks when faced with overwhelming odds. It made the conquest more violent than necessary, but the outcome remained inevitable. They're coming straight at us, his tactical officer reported. No attempt at tactical formations or strategic positioning. They appear to be simply charging our position at maximum acceleration. Foolish, Zexthal muttered. Are they attempting to ram us? Do they think sacrifice attacks will somehow damage our fleet? His sensor officer frowned at his readings. Admiral, their acceleration curves don't match our intelligence estimates of their propulsion capabilities. They're moving significantly faster than they should be able to. Explain. Our projections indicated their ships could maintain 15 gravities of acceleration for short periods. They're currently pulling 47 gravities and showing no signs of deceleration stress. Zexthal felt the first stirring of unease. Either their intelligence was drastically wrong, or the humans have been deliberately concealing their true capabilities. Time to contact? 14 minutes at their current acceleration rate. Battle stations. Launch all fighter squadrons and bring the fleet to combat formation. We'll demonstrate the futility of their attack and offer surrender terms after we've disabled their fleet. As his orders were transmitted throughout the fleet, Zexthal watched the tactical display show 200 Imperial capital ships arranging themselves in the traditional battle formation, a complex geometric pattern that had proven effective in every engagement for the past 800 years. His ships were larger, more heavily armed, and protected by energy shields that could deflect any known weapon. The human fleet continued its suicidal charge, showing no tactical sophistication whatsoever. Admiral, his communications officer called out, we're receiving additional transmissions from the approaching human vessels. Display them. The bridge screens activated, showing feeds from multiple human ships. What Zexthal saw made him question whether he was looking at military personnel or something else entirely. The humans weren't sitting calmly at their stations preparing for battle. They were moving with a frenetic energy that seemed barely contained, their faces showing expressions of anticipation that looked more like bloodlust than professional military focus. Many were shouting, not orders or tactical information, but something that sounded almost like celebration. On one screen, a human commander was speaking to his crew. Remember, people, aim for the engines first. We want them alive when we board. Dead enemies can't suffer properly. On another screen, a different human was saying, I know regulations say we're supposed to accept surrender, but regulations also say a lot of things we're going to ignore today. These bastards made the mistake of threatening our families. Zexthal realized with growing horror that these weren't military commanders preparing for a defensive action. These are predators working themselves into a feeding frenzy. 10 minutes to contact, his tactical officer reported. Admiral, should we begin charging main weapons? Yes, prepare to. His response was cut off as every sensor on the bridge began screaming warnings simultaneously. The lead human ships had just done something that should have been impossible. Admiral, his science officer, shouted over the alarms. The human ships are exhibiting massive energy spikes. They're channeling power levels that should tear their vessels apart. On the tactical display, the approaching human fleet began to change. Their ships, which had appeared primitive and underpowered, were suddenly radiating energy signatures that matched Imperial dreadnoughts. But more disturbing than their sudden power increase was what they were doing with it. Instead of powering additional shields or weapons, they were channeling everything into their propulsion systems, accelerating far beyond what any rational commander would consider safe. Their ships were becoming missiles, but missiles guided by intelligence and armed with weapons. They're not trying to win a battle, Zexthal realized with dawning horror. They're turning themselves into weapons. His tactical officer looked up from his console, his expression showing the same realization. Admiral, at their current acceleration and mass, even our shields won't be able to fully absorb the kinetic impact if they actually ram us. But that would destroy their own ships. I don't think they care, sir. The communication screens were still showing feeds from the human vessels, and what Zexthal saw there confirmed his worst fears. The humans weren't afraid of dying in the attack. They were excited by the prospect. They were singing, actually singing, as they charged toward what should have been certain death. 5 minutes to contact. Admiral, we need to begin evasive maneuvers immediately. But Zexthal knew it was too late. His fleet was arranged in traditional battle formation, optimized for mutual fire support, not evasive action. The massive Imperial ships couldn't change course quickly enough to avoid the incoming human projectiles. All ships, emergency scatter pattern, break formation, and the first human ship reached weapons range and opened fire. What emerged from his weapon ports wasn't the coherent energy beams or guided missiles that characterized civilized warfare. Instead, streams of what appeared to be molten metal mixed with some kind of chemical incendiary struck the nearest Imperial cruiser. The cruiser's shields absorbed the initial impact, but then something unexpected happened. The molten metal began eating through the shield generators themselves, dissolving the very technology that should have protected the ship. Within seconds, the shields collapsed entirely. What kind of weapon is that? Zexthal demanded. His science officer was frantically analyzing sensor data. It appears to be weaponized industrial mining equipment, modified to spray superheated metallic compounds mixed with corrosive agents. It's not even military technology. They've turned mining tools into weapons. More human ships reached firing range, and each one seemed to carry weapons that defied military logic. Instead of elegant energy weapons or precision-guided missiles, they were using devices that seemed designed specifically to cause maximum suffering rather than clean, efficient destruction. One ship was firing what appeared to be modified construction equipment that wrapped metal cables around Imperial vessels and began physically tearing them apart. Another was launching clouds of microscopic robots that burrowed into ship hulls and dismantled them from the inside. A third was using some kind of gravity manipulation device to crush Imperial ships like aluminum cans. But it wasn't the weapons themselves that terrified Zexthal. It was the obvious delight with which the humans were using them. Every transmission from the human fleet showed crews celebrating each successful hit as if they were children playing a particularly enjoyable game. Admiral, his tactical officer reported, his voice strained, "We've lost 17 ships in the first exchange. The humans are using tactics that don't make sense. They're sacrificing their own vessels to maximize damage to ours, but they're doing it selectively. They're targeting our ships in order of crew size, starting with the largest. They're prioritizing casualties over tactical value," Zexthal whispered, finally understanding. "They want to kill as many of us as possible." The first human ship reached ramming distance and struck an Imperial destroyer amidships. But instead of simply colliding and exploding, the human vessel seemed to have been designed specifically for ramming attacks. It penetrated deep into the destroyer's hull before detonating its entire payload of weaponized industrial chemicals directly inside the ship's crew compartments. The destroyer didn't just explode, it dissolved from the inside out, its crew dying in ways that Zexthol's species had no words to describe. And through it all, the humans kept singing. As the battle continued to unfold in ways that violated every principle of civilized warfare, Zexthol began to understand what General Morrison had been trying to tell him. The humans hadn't developed military technology. They had weaponized their entire industrial base. They hadn't trained soldiers. They had unleashed predators who happened to wear uniforms. The Empire had come expecting to fight an army. Instead, they had encountered something far worse. An entire species that treated warfare not as a means to an end, but as an art form to be perfected through creative brutality. By the time the first wave of human ships had finished their attack runs, Zexthol's fleet had been reduced by nearly half. But what terrified him most was the realization that this had only been the opening move. According to his sensors, the main human fleet was still approaching. And if their first transmission was accurate, this was what they considered restraint. Admiral Zexthol's remaining fleet hung in the void, surrounded by the wreckage of what had once been the pride of the Imperial Navy. The human attack had lasted exactly 17 minutes. In that time, they had reduced his force from 200 capital ships to 97 operational vessels, and they had done it while suffering losses of less than 30%. But what disturbed Zexthol more than the tactical impossibility of their victory was the method by which they had achieved it. His crews were reporting details that didn't belong in any military engagement he had ever witnessed. Admiral, his medical officer's voice came through the communications system, strained and uncertain. We're receiving distress signals from the survivors of the glorious conquest. They're reporting that the humans are still aboard their ship. Still aboard? The battle ended 40 minutes ago. Yes, sir. But, according to the survivors, the humans who breached their hull didn't leave after disabling the ship. They're still inside, and The medical officer paused, seeming to struggle with the words. Sir, they appear to be hunting the remaining crew members. Zexthol felt his blood temperature drop. Explain. The humans have disabled all the ship's vital systems, but they've left life support operational. They've sealed off escape routes and are systematically searching the ship, section by section. The survivors report that the humans are taking their time, making noise to let the crew know they're coming, and when they find someone, another pause. Admiral, they're not killing them immediately. They're playing with them. The bridge fell silent except for the ambient hum of ship systems. In 8 centuries of imperial military history, no species had ever engaged in behavior like this during combat operations. How many other ships are reporting similar situations? His communications officer consulted his board. 37 vessels, sir. In every case, the humans are conducting what can only be described as hunting expeditions through the disabled ships. Zexthol closed his eyes, trying to process this information through the lens of military doctrine. Nothing in his training had prepared him for an enemy that treated battle as entertainment. Sir, his tactical officer interrupted, we're receiving a new transmission from the human fleet. Display it. General Morrison appeared on the screen again, but her environment had changed. She was no longer in what appeared to be a command center. Instead, she seemed to be aboard one of the human ships that had participated in the attack, surrounded by her crew. What shocked Zexthol was the atmosphere. The humans looked like they had just returned from a successful hunting expedition. They were relaxed, celebratory, sharing stories, and laughing. Admiral Zexthol, Morrison began, somehow knowing his name despite never having been introduced. I hope you're beginning to understand what we tried to explain earlier. What you just witnessed wasn't a battle by human standards. It was target practice. She gestured to something off-screen, and the camera angle shifted to show what appeared to be a trophy room. The walls were lined with pieces of Imperial ships, hull fragments, weapon components, pieces of technology that had been carefully removed and displayed like hunting trophies. Your ships are well built, Morrison continued conversationally. But your crew compartments are designed for comfort rather than survival. Your weapon systems prioritize elegance over effectiveness. Your tactical formations assume your enemies will behave rationally. She smiled, and Zexthal saw something predatory in the expression. You fight like a civilization. We fight like the apex predators we evolved to be. The camera shifted again, showing more of the human ship's interior. Zexthal realized with growing horror that what he was seeing wasn't a military vessel in any traditional sense. It was a hunting lodge that happened to be equipped with spaceflight capability and weapon systems. We've analyzed your remaining fleet composition, Morrison said, consulting a datapad that appeared to be made from materials salvaged from destroyed Imperial ships. 97 operational vessels, approximately 8 million personnel. Your ships are faster than ours in open space, so you might think you can escape. She looked directly into the camera, and Zexthal felt like prey being studied by a predator. You can't. We've been tracking starships for 3 centuries, Admiral. We know how to hunt things that can run faster than we can. The secret is understanding that the hunt doesn't end when the prey tries to escape. It ends when the prey stops running. The transmission paused, and Morrison appeared to be listening to something off-screen. When she turned back to the camera, her expression had changed from conversational to businesslike. I'm receiving reports from our boarding parties. Your crews are putting up more resistance than we expected. Some of them are actually trying to fight back instead of just hiding. We appreciate that. It makes the hunt more interesting. Zexthal realized with sick certainty that Morrison wasn't exaggerating. The humans weren't simply conducting military operations. They were engaged in what they genuinely considered sport. Here's what's going to happen, Morrison continued. We're going to give you exactly 1 hour to begin withdrawing from our system. If you're still here after that time expires, we're going to assume you want to continue playing our game. The general's expression became almost friendly, which somehow made her words more terrifying. And, Admiral, if we continue playing, we're going to introduce you to some of our more creative approaches to warfare. What you experienced today was our restraint. We were being polite because this was first contact. But if you stay, we're going to show you what humans do when we stop being polite and start being ourselves. The transmission ended. Zexthal stood in the silence that followed, trying to reconcile what he had just heard with his understanding of civilized behavior. In his experience, species that achieved spaceflight had evolved beyond primitive aggression. The development of interstellar technology required cooperation, long-term thinking, and the ability to suppress immediate violent impulses in favor of rational planning. But the humans seemed to have achieved spaceflight without abandoning their predatory nature. They had simply learned to apply their hunting instincts to increasingly sophisticated prey. Admiral, his tactical officer, said quietly, recommend immediate withdrawal. We can return with a larger fleet, develop countermeasures for their unconventional tactics. Before Zexthal could respond, alarms began sounding across the bridge. His sensor officer looked up from his console with an expression of confusion. Admiral, we're detecting new contacts approaching from multiple vectors. They don't match the signatures of the ships we engaged earlier. Reinforcements? No, sir. These appear to be different classes of vessels entirely. Larger signatures, but moving much more slowly than the attack ships. On the tactical display, New contacts began appearing throughout the system. Unlike the fast, aggressive vessels that had attacked his fleet, these new ships were massive, moving with deliberate purpose rather than predatory speed. Analysis. His intelligence officer studied the incoming data. Based on their size and energy signatures, these appear to be industrial vessels, possibly mining ships, construction platforms, maybe cargo haulers. Why would they send industrial ships to a battle zone? Before anyone could answer, his communications officer received another transmission from the human fleet. It's not from General Morrison this time, Admiral. It's from one of the new contacts. Display it. The screen activated, showing a different human. This one was older, wearing what appeared to be civilian clothing rather than a military uniform. Behind him, Zexthal could see what looked like an industrial facility, machinery, workstations, equipment that belonged in a factory rather than a warship. Imperial Fleet, the civilian began. This is Captain Sarah Chun of the mining vessel Profitable Extraction. I'm broadcasting on behalf of the Asteroid Miners Union, the Deep Space Construction Guild, and the Cargo Haulers Association. Zexthal felt a chill of premonition. If the human military had been this dangerous, what were their civilians capable of? We've been monitoring the military engagement with great interest, Chun continued, and we voted to participate in the defense of our system. Now, I want you to understand something about human industrial workers. We don't fight the same way the military does. She gestured to something off-screen, and the camera angle widened to show the interior of her ship. What Zexthal saw defied belief. The humans had converted their industrial vessels into something that could only be described as mobile factories of destruction. The military tries to kill enemies efficiently, Chun explained. We prefer to think of this as a demolition project. And in the demolition business, efficiency isn't as important as thoroughness. Behind her, Zexthal could see humans working with industrial equipment that had been modified in ways that seemed to violate basic safety principles. They were handling materials and energy sources that should have required protective gear, but they seemed to treat them as casually as household tools. We've had about an hour to prepare, Chun said, and we've made some modifications to our equipment that we think you'll find interesting. For example, our mining lasers are designed to cut through solid asteroid rock. Your ship hulls appear to be made of much softer materials. The camera shifted to show one of the modified mining lasers. It was a massive device that looked like it could carve through a mountain, and the humans operating it were making adjustments with the casual confidence of people who had done this kind of work for decades. Our construction ships carry industrial fabricators that can build space stations, Chun continued. We've reprogrammed them to build other things. Unpleasant things. Things specifically designed to take apart ships like yours. More equipment became visible. Devices that looked like they could disassemble molecular structures. Machines that seemed designed to process raw materials on an industrial scale. Tools that could probably rebuild entire ships for basic elements. And our cargo haulers, Chun said with obvious pride, are equipped with gravitational manipulation systems designed to move asteroids weighing millions of tons. We've been wondering what would happen if we used those systems on something smaller and more fragile, like your ships. Zexthal realized that the humans had just introduced an entirely new category of threat. If their military had been dangerous, their industrial capacity was potentially catastrophic. Now, Chun concluded, we understand that this might seem unfair. After all, you came here expecting to fight soldiers, not construction workers and miners. But here's the thing about humans. We don't really distinguish between military and civilian when our families are threatened. We're all killers. We just use different tools. The transmission ended, and Zexthal stared at the tactical display, showing dozens of massive industrial ships moving into position around his fleet. Each one was larger than his flagship, and if they had even a fraction of the capabilities that Sean had described, his remaining ships wouldn't stand chance. "Admiral," his tactical officer said urgently, "we need to make a decision immediately. The human industrial ships will be in weapons range in less than 30 minutes. Zexthal looked around his bridge at officers who had served with distinction in 18 previous conquests, all of them now showing expressions of uncertainty and fear. They had trained for warfare against civilized opponents who followed established rules and protocols. They had no frame of reference for dealing with an entire species that treated violence as a recreational activity. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving distress signals from 31 of our disabled ships. The human boarding parties have completed their activities and are now offering to provide medical assistance to the survivors." "Medical assistance?" "Yes, sir. Apparently, they want to keep the wounded alive so they can be interrogated about Imperial military capabilities. But, according to the survivors, the humans seem to consider the interrogation process as entertaining as the initial combat." Zexthal closed his eyes and made the hardest decision of his military career. In 18 previous conquests, he had never retreated from an enemy force. But in 18 previous conquests, he had never encountered anything like humanity. "Signal all ships," he ordered quietly. "Prepare for immediate withdrawal from this system." "Sir," his tactical officer seemed uncertain. "The Empire doesn't retreat. Our orders are to secure this system regardless of casualties." Zexthal looked at the tactical display one more time, showing the wreckage of half his fleet surrounded by human ships that seemed to view the destruction as entertainment, with industrial vessels moving into position to finish what the military had started. "Signal the Empire," he said finally. "Tell them we encountered something that isn't covered by standard conquest protocols. Tell them the humans aren't a civilization that can be conquered through normal military operations." He paused, trying to find words that would accurately convey what he had learned. "Tell them Earth isn't a world inhabited by rational beings who can be reasoned with or intimidated. It's a world of predators who have learned to use technology. And we just taught them that there are bigger prey available in the galaxy than anything they've hunted before." As his fleet began powering up their faster-than-light drives, preparing to flee from the first battle the Empire had ever lost, Zexthal realized that they had made a mistake far worse than underestimating human military capabilities. They had awakened something that had been content to remain on its own world, hunting smaller prey. Now it knew that the galaxy was full of bigger, more interesting targets. And it was hungry. 3 months after Admiral Zexthal's fleet limped back to Imperial space with news of their unprecedented defeat, the Galactic Empire's high command faced a crisis that had no precedent in their 8 centuries of expansion. For the first time in their history, they had encountered a species that not only refused to submit to Imperial authority, but seemed to view their vast military machine as nothing more than an interesting collection of hunting targets. Emperor Vakthul stood before the assembled high command in the Empire's most secure strategic facility, studying holographic displays that showed the impossible. Where once there had been clear Imperial borders marking the edge of civilized space, there were now reports of mysterious attacks, missing fleets, and entire star systems going dark without explanation. "Report," the Emperor commanded, his voice carrying the authority of absolute power that had never before been successfully challenged. Fleet Admiral Kexvar stepped forward, his usually immaculate uniform showing signs of stress that would have been unthinkable 3 months earlier. "Your Imperial Majesty," The situation has escalated beyond our initial projections. The holographic display shifted, showing a three-dimensional map of the galaxy with red zones, marking areas of Imperial control and neutral systems. But scattered throughout the map were black zones, areas where Imperial forces had simply vanished without trace. Following Admiral Zexthal's withdrawal from the human system, we implemented Protocol 7, a complete military quarantine around Earth's solar system. No Imperial ships were to approach within 50 light-years of the human homeworld. Emperor Vakthul's 4 eyes narrowed dangerously, and yet these attacks are occurring hundreds of light-years from Earth. Explain. Admiral Kexvar activated additional displays, showing a timeline of incidents that painted an increasingly disturbing picture. 43 days ago, our patrol fleet in the Kepler sector encountered what appeared to be a small human scouting force. The humans requested permission to explore the neighborhood. When our commanders refused and ordered them to return to their quarantine zone, the humans responded by laughing. Laughing, yes, Your Majesty. And then they proceeded to demonstrate that our quarantine was meaningless. They didn't fight our patrol fleet, they played with it. They disabled our ships using weapons that appear to be modified recreational equipment, boarded our vessels, and spent several hours conducting what they called cultural exchange. The Emperor's scales shifted color, indicating rising anger. Cultural exchange? They interviewed our crews extensively about Imperial military capabilities, political structure, and territorial holdings. But, according to the survivors, the humans treated the interrogation as if they were simply curious tourists asking for directions. Admiral Kexvar activated another display, showing recorded testimony from the surviving crew members. The recordings showed Imperial personnel in obvious states of psychological distress, describing encounters that seemed to have broken their understanding of rational behavior. The humans returned our crews unharmed, Admiral Kexvar continued, but they kept our ships. They said they wanted to study the local craftsmanship and see how these things work. And since then, Your Majesty, human ships have been appearing throughout the outer territories. They don't seem to be following any strategic plan that we can identify. Instead, they appear to be exploring. But the method of exploration involves hunting Imperial forces for sport. The Emperor studied the tactical displays with growing incredulity. Are you telling me that this primitive species is treating the entire Imperial military as a recreational activity? That appears to be accurate, Your Majesty. Intelligence analysis suggests that the humans view our military operations as a new type of game. They've developed what they call hunting seasons for different classes of Imperial ships. They have competitions to see who can disable our vessels using the most creative methods. Admiral Kexvar activated a new series of displays, showing intelligence reports that painted an almost surreal picture of human military activity. They've established what they call hunting lodges in several neutral systems, where human groups gather to share stories about their encounters with Imperial forces and plan their next expeditions. They've also begun trading among themselves, using pieces of Imperial technology as currency. The Emperor's expression had moved beyond anger into something approaching disbelief. They're using our ships as trophies? Yes, Your Majesty. But more concerning is their apparent learning curve. Each encounter with Imperial forces seems to provide them with new information about our capabilities and weaknesses. They're adapting their tactics faster than we could develop countermeasures. The displays shifted again, showing analysis of human ships captured during recent engagements. What the Imperial scientists had discovered defied their understanding of technological development. Your Majesty, The chief science officer interrupted, stepping forward with obvious reluctance. Our analysis of captured human technology has revealed something unprecedented. The humans don't appear to develop technology in the same way other species do. Explain. Most civilizations advance through careful research, testing, and gradual improvement of existing systems. The humans seem to approach technology as if it were prey to be hunted and consumed. They take equipment from other species, study it just long enough to understand its basic function, then modify in ways that shouldn't work but somehow do. The science officer activated a holographic display showing the interior of a captured human ship. What the Imperial scientists saw there challenged their understanding of engineering principles. This vessel started as a human cargo hauler, but they've integrated Imperial shield generators, Zephyrian weapon systems, Altarian navigation equipment, and propulsion technology from at least 6 different species. By conventional engineering standards, these systems shouldn't be compatible. They should interfere with each other catastrophically. But they don't. No, Your Majesty. The humans have found ways to make incompatible technologies work together through methods that appear to violate fundamental principles of physics and engineering. It's as if they view technological limitations as challenges to be overcome rather than absolute restrictions. Emperor Vakthul absorbed this information, trying to process the implications through the lens of Imperial strategic doctrine. The Empire had achieved galactic dominance by following predictable patterns, superior technology, overwhelming numerical advantage, and the rational self-interest of civilized species who preferred submission to destruction. But the humans seemed to operate according to completely different principles. They weren't interested in territorial control or resource acquisition or political dominance. They appear to view the entire galaxy as a hunting preserve, with Imperial forces serving as the most interesting prey available. What are our options? The Emperor asked finally. Admiral Kexvar consulted his strategic assessments. We have considered several approaches, Your Majesty. Total military mobilization could provide sufficient force to overwhelm the humans through sheer numbers. But our analysis suggests that large-scale warfare would only make them more dangerous. How so? The humans appear to treat larger military engagements as more entertaining challenges. Intelligence suggests that they're actually hoping we'll escalate the conflict because it would provide them with more interesting opponents. The Emperor's expression grew thoughtful. What about diplomacy? We attempted diplomatic contact 37 days ago, Your Majesty. The human response was unconventional. Admiral Kexvar activated a recording of the diplomatic exchange. The screen showed an Imperial ambassador in formal diplomatic regalia, attempting to negotiate a peace treaty with what appeared to be a human military commander. The humans listened politely to our terms, Admiral Kexvar narrated, but when our ambassador offered them territorial concessions and trade agreements in exchange for peace, the human commander asked if we could instead provide them with more challenging opponents. The recording showed the human commander, a female with the same predatory expression that General Morrison had displayed, responding to the Imperial peace offer. We appreciate the offer, the human was saying, but we're not really interested in territory or resources. What we'd really like is if you could arrange some kind of tournament. Maybe organize your best military units into increasingly difficult challenges. We'd be happy to work out some kind of scoring system. The Imperial ambassador in the recording looked completely bewildered. You want us to organize military competitions for your entertainment? Exactly. Think of it as cultural exchange. You get to see what humans are capable of when we're really trying, and we get to test ourselves against the most sophisticated military force in the galaxy. Everyone wins. The recording ended, leaving the High Command chamber in stunned silence. Your Majesty, Admiral Kexvar continued, the humans have made it clear that they're not interested in conquest, tribute, or territorial expansion. They want to hunt us, and they consider our attempts to stop them as part of the entertainment. Emperor Vakthul studied the strategic displays one more time, noting the spreading black zones where Imperial forces had simply vanished. The humans weren't expanding in any conventional sense. They were exploring, hunting, learning. They were treating the entire galaxy as their personal hunting ground. Sir, the intelligence chief spoke up, we've received additional communications from human sources that may be relevant. Display them. The screen activated, showing what appeared to be a human news broadcast. The format was unlike anything in Imperial communications. Casual, almost festive, as if the entire species treated warfare as entertainment. This is Sarah Martinez reporting for Earth News Network. The human broadcaster began. Today marks the 3-month anniversary of what historians are calling first contact with interesting neighbors. I'm here with Dr. James Patterson, xenopsychologist and author of the best-selling book, Why Aliens Make Such Great Hunting. The camera shifted to show 2 humans sitting in what appeared to be a comfortable studio setting, discussing the conflict as if it were a sporting event. Dr. Patterson, the reporter continued, how would you assess humanity's performance in our ongoing cultural exchange with the galactic empire? Dr. Patterson smiled with obvious enthusiasm. Sarah, I have to say, this has exceeded our wildest expectations. When we first encountered Imperial forces, we were worried they might be too advanced for us to provide meaningful competition. But it turns out they've developed some fascinating weaknesses that make them absolutely perfect prey. Can you elaborate on that? Certainly. The Empire has spent centuries conquering civilizations that follow predictable rational patterns. They've optimized their military doctrine for fighting opponents who value survival over victory. But humans are apex predators who evolved in an environment where everything was trying to kill us. We don't fight to survive. We fight because we enjoy it. The reporter nodded as if this were perfectly reasonable. And how has the Empire responded to our unique approach? They keep trying to make sense of our behavior through their own cultural framework. They assume we want something they can give us: territory, resources, political concessions. They can't comprehend that what we want is the hunt itself. Dr. Patterson leaned forward, his expression becoming more animated. The Empire represents the ultimate hunting experience, Sarah. They're intelligent, well-equipped, numerous, and spread throughout the galaxy. They're like a puzzle that fights back, the perfect combination of challenge and entertainment. The broadcast continued, showing interviews with human military personnel, civilian hunters, and even children discussing the Imperial situation as if it were the most exciting development in human history. Emperor Vakthul turned away from the display, finally understanding the true scope of the crisis facing the Empire. This wasn't a military conflict in any traditional sense. The humans hadn't declared war. They had decided that the Empire would serve as their entertainment. Your Majesty, Admiral Kexvar said quietly, there's one more development you should know about. Yes, our deep space monitoring stations have detected unusual activity in human space. They appear to be constructing something massive in their home system. Initial analysis suggests it's some kind of industrial facility, but the scale is unprecedented. Show me. The display shifted to show long-range sensor data from Earth's solar system. What the Imperial sensors had detected there defied rational explanation. The humans were building something that appeared to be larger than most space stations, but it didn't match any known design principles. Analysis suggests it's a construction facility designed to build starships, Admiral Kexvar explained. But the projected capacity is enormous. They appear to be preparing to construct a fleet that could number in the hundreds of thousands of vessels. Emperor Vakthul stared at the display, finally understanding the full implications of their situation. The humans weren't just hunting Imperial forces for sport. They were preparing to hunt the entire galaxy. Your Majesty, the chief science officer said urgently, there's something else. We've detected similar construction activity in several systems that the humans have visited recently. They appear to be establishing hunting lodges and equipment manufacturing facilities throughout the outer territories. They're industrializing their hunting activities? Yes, Your Majesty. And based on the rate of expansion, they'll have the capacity to engage multiple galactic civilizations simultaneously within the next standard year. Emperor Vakthul realized that the Empire faced a choice between impossible alternatives. They could attempt to destroy humanity using the full might of their military machine. But their analysis suggested this would only make the humans more dangerous and more interested in galactic-scale hunting. Or they could attempt to coexist with a species that viewed the Empire's military forces as recreational equipment. Recommendations? He asked finally. The High Command exchanged glances, each waiting for someone else to propose a solution to an impossible problem. Your Majesty, Admiral Kexvar said slowly, there may be a third option. Explain. Intelligence suggests that while humans are apex predators, they're also highly social creatures who respond positively to interesting challenges. What if, instead of fighting them or surrendering to them, we attempted to redirect their hunting instincts toward other targets? The Emperor considered this. You're suggesting we form an alliance with them? Not exactly, Your Majesty. I'm suggesting we hire them. Admiral Kexvar activated new displays, showing data about other galactic civilizations that have been causing problems for the Empire. The hive clusters in the Magellanic systems have been raiding our outer territories for decades. The synthetic collective has been expanding into sectors we consider Imperial territory. The Void Cult has been conducting terrorist attacks on civilian populations. The Emperor began to understand where this was leading. You want to point the humans at our enemies? Your Majesty, based on our analysis of human psychology, they would consider those civilizations to be much more interesting hunting targets than our own forces. The hive clusters represent a completely different form of intelligence. The synthetic collective offers the challenge of fighting opponents who don't follow biological limitations. The Void Cult practices forms of warfare that even humans might find creative. Emperor Vakthul studied the strategic implications. Instead of trying to contain or destroy humanity, they could potentially turn Earth's hunters into the Empire's most effective weapon against long-standing threats. And the humans would agree to this? According to our psychological profiles, Your Majesty, they would be delighted. We wouldn't be hiring them as mercenaries. We'd be providing them with more interesting prey. For the first time in months, Emperor Vakthul saw a path forward that didn't end with either the destruction of humanity or the collapse of the Empire. The humans couldn't be conquered, reasoned with, or contained. But perhaps they could be aimed. Draft a proposal, he ordered, but make it clear that we're not surrendering to them. We're offering them something they want more than hunting us. Bigger, more dangerous, more creative prey. As his staff began working on what would become the most unusual diplomatic document in galactic history, Emperor Vakthul reflected on the irony of the situation. The Empire had set out to conquer Earth and add humanity to their collection of subject species. Instead, they had discovered that Earth didn't produce subjects or citizens or soldiers. Earth produced hunters who wore uniforms and had learned to use starships. And now, those hunters were about to be unleashed on a galaxy that had no idea what was coming. The Empire had wanted to expand its territory by conquering one small world. Instead, they had inadvertently recruited the most effective military force in galactic history, a species that treated warfare as entertainment and viewed the entire universe as a hunting preserve. As reports continued to flow in from across Imperial space, showing the spreading influence of human hunters establishing themselves throughout the galaxy, Emperor Vakthul realized that the age of predictable, civilized warfare was ending. The humans had arrived, and they were hungry for bigger prey. The galaxy was about to learn why Earth had never produced noble warriors or honorable commanders. It had produced something far more dangerous. Savage warriors who had learned to wear uniforms and who were now ready to hunt among the stars.